8 months after I buried my husband, I found his phone in the pocket of his winter coat. The coat had been hanging in the hall closet since February. I had walked past it every single day. I had touched the sleeve once in March without meaning to, and then not again. It was a charcoal wool overcoat, the good one he wore to client meetings and holiday dinners. I was finally taking it to donation when I felt the weight in the left pocket. The battery was at 4%. There were 11 voicemails. The first 10 were mine, left in the days after he died when I still couldn't stop calling his number just to hear his voice on the outgoing message. The 11th was not mine. It was left 2 days before he died. A woman's voice, calm and familiar in tone, the way you speak to someone you know very well. Thomas. The tickets are confirmed. March 22nd. Don't be late this time. I stood in my hallway holding a dead man's phone and understood that I had been living inside a story I didn't know the ending of. My name is Eleanor Brooks. I am 62 years old and I live in Connecticut. Thomas was my husband for 38 years. He died on a Tuesday morning in February, cardiac arrest, sudden, no warning that I was told about. I planned the funeral. I received the condolences. I learned how to sleep alone in a house that still smelled like him for longer than I expected. I thought the hardest part was behind me. I was wrong. If this story stays with you, please subscribe and leave me a comment below. Tell me what city you're watching from tonight. I read every single one. Now let me tell you about the 11th voicemail. Thomas Brooks was not a man who lost things. That sounds like a small detail, but it wasn't. In 38 years of marriage, I never once saw him misplace his keys, forget where he'd put his wallet, or leave the house without everything he needed precisely where he expected it to be. He had a system for everything. Keys on the hook by the door. Phone on the nightstand charger by 10 o'clock every night. Wallet in the left breast pocket of whatever jacket he was wearing. Never the right, never a pants pocket, always the left breast pocket, because that was where it went, and that was where it had always gone. He was a man of habits so consistent they had become invisible. The kind of invisible that only registers as remarkable when the person is gone, and you realize you had been navigating around their patterns for decades without noticing. So finding his old phone in his coat pocket was not, on the surface, a thing that should have been possible. Thomas did not leave phones in pockets. Thomas transferred everything from old devices before disposing of them. Thomas would have known exactly where that phone was and exactly what was on it. Which means he left it there deliberately. I didn't understand that yet when I found it. I only understood it later, when I had time to think about the kind of man Thomas was and what it meant that his old phone had been sitting in his coat pocket for 8 months, with 11 voicemails on it, and 4% battery remaining. He left it there for a reason. I just didn't know what the reason was yet. We met in Boston in 1984. I have told that story enough times that it has become polished. The way stories become polished when you have told them at dinner parties and anniversary celebrations, and to your grandchildren who ask how grandma and grandpa met, with the particular curiosity of children who cannot yet imagine their grandparents as young. He sat across from me in a graduate school library for 3 weeks before he spoke. When he finally did, the first thing he said was about the way I treated my books. I told him it depended on the book. He smiled like that was exactly right. We were married 2 years later in my parents' backyard in Hartford. 43 people. My mother cried through the entire reception. It was June and the roses were out and everything smelled like the beginning of something that was going to last. It did last. That is the complicated truth I have had to sit with since February. 38 years is not nothing. 38 years of dinners and arguments and reconciliations and seasons, and the particular comfort of knowing exactly how another person takes their coffee, and what side of the bed they need, and what kind of silence means they are fine versus what kind means they are not. Thomas was a family law attorney. Estate planning, property disputes, the careful documentation of people's lives and assets and intentions. He was good at his work in the way that people are good at things that suit their fundamental nature. He was precise. He was patient. He noticed everything and forgot nothing and kept records the way some people keep promises, automatically, without having to think about it. He retired at 64. I noticed changes after that. Small ones. Long drives alone that he said helped him think. A quietness that settled over him like weather. New financial arrangements he explained carefully and that I signed without reading closely because I had never had reason not to trust him. He had 2 phones. I know that now. I did not know it then. The phone I knew about was the one on the nightstand charger every night by 10 o'clock, the one whose number I had memorized 30 years ago, the one I called from the hospital parking lot to tell him my mother had fallen. The phone I found in his coat pocket was different. Older model. A number I didn't recognize. A device that existed in a part of his life I had no access to. He carried it in his coat. The good coat he wore to things that mattered. The charcoal wool overcoat that hung in the closet for 8 months after he died, while I walked past it every day and told myself I would deal with it eventually. The coat was the last thing I gave away. I had moved through the rest of his belongings with the systematic grief of a woman who understood that the physical presence of someone's things is both a comfort and a weight you cannot carry indefinitely. His suits went first, to a men's shelter downtown that Patricia's office recommended. His books were harder. Thomas had been a reader all his life and his books had opinions, marginalia in the margins, passages underlined. Small folded corners that marked pages he intended to return to. I kept those. I kept all of them and put them in the spare room where I didn't have to look at them every day, but could find them if I needed to. His watch went to Lucas. His father's tools, which had moved with us through 4 houses in a canvas bag, went to a neighbor who I knew would actually use them. His reading glasses, 3 pairs distributed around the house the way reading glasses accumulate in long marriages, I put in a drawer and closed it. The coat I couldn't touch until August. It was a Saturday morning. I had decided the night before that I was going to do it, the way you have to decide the night before for certain things, or you will find a reason not to. I took it from the closet and carried it to the kitchen table and stood looking at it for a moment. Then I checked the pockets the way you check pockets before donating anything. Right pocket empty. Left pocket a phone. An older model, one I didn't recognize. Black. Small. The kind of device that predated the one he used daily by several years. I turned it over in my hand. No case. A small scratch across the lower right corner of the screen that I didn't recognize. I pressed the power button without expecting anything. The screen lit up. 4% battery. The number glowed in the corner like a warning. And across the center of the screen, in the notification panel, a number. 11 voicemails. I put the coat down on the kitchen chair. I stood at my kitchen counter and looked at that phone the way you look at something when you already know, in the part of yourself that knows things before the rest of you catches up, that whatever comes next is going to be significant. I had a choice in that moment. I was aware of having it. I could put the phone on the counter and let the battery die and give the coat to the shelter and never know. Some mornings since then I have thought about that choice and wondered what my life would look like if I had made the other one. But I have never seriously wished I had. Because not knowing was not peace. Not knowing was just a different shape of the same problem, and I had already spent 8 months not knowing things I should have known, and I was done with it. I pressed the voicemail icon. The first message began to play. It was my voice. Thomas. It's me. I know you can't hear this. I needed to call. The house is very quiet tonight. I made dinner for 2 by mistake. I don't know why I'm telling you this. I just needed to hear the phone ring. February 15th. The day after he died. One day into a grief I thought I understood. I stood at my kitchen counter in August and listened to myself in February, and the distance between those 2 women felt like a country I had crossed without a map. The second message. February 16th. The third. February 17th. I listened to all 10 of my own messages. My voice moving through the stages of those first 10 days, the disbelief, the practical grief, the middle of the night calls when the silence got too heavy, the gradual slowing as I began to accept that he was not going to call back. 10 messages from a woman who believed completely in her own loss. Then the 11th. Not my voice. A woman's voice. Calm. Unhurried. Slightly warm in the way of someone leaving a routine message for someone they know well. Thomas. The tickets are confirmed. March 22nd. Don't be late this time. 7 seconds. Then the line closed. The message had been left on the 12th of February. 2 days before he died. 2 days before I came home from book club and found him gone. I set the phone face down on the counter. I looked out the kitchen window at the yard where the August light was coming through the trees in the late morning way it does, golden and indifferent, and completely unbothered by anything happening inside the house. I picked the phone back up. I called Patricia Hale. Patricia answered on the 3rd ring. I had called her enough times in the past several months that she had stopped answering with her full professional greeting. She simply said my name now, with a particular quality of attention that told me she understood I did not call without reason. I found something, I said. Another phone. Thomas had a second phone. A brief silence. Where are you? Home. My kitchen. Don't touch anything else on the device, she said. Don't delete anything, don't forward anything, don't call the number back. I'm going to contact Sandra. Can you come in this afternoon? Yes, I said. Good. Bring the phone and whatever it was stored in. I looked at the charcoal coat folded over the kitchen chair. I'll bring the coat too, I said. Good thinking, Patricia said. And then, before she hung up, Eleanor. Are you all right? I considered the question honestly. I'm functioning, I said. Same as before. She accepted that because she knew by now that functioning was the most accurate word for what I did in the hours between discoveries. I did not fall apart. I did not rage. I moved through the immediate practical requirements of a situation and saved the rest for later, for the nights when the house was quiet and there was nothing left to manage and the feelings found the space they'd been waiting for. I put the phone in a Ziploc bag the way I had seen done on enough crime documentaries to understand that evidence needs to be preserved. I folded the coat carefully and laid it in a tote bag. I made myself a cup of coffee I didn't drink. Then I sat at the kitchen table and waited for a reasonable hour to drive downtown. While I waited, I did the thing Patricia had told me not to do. Not with the phone. I put the phone in my purse and left it there. But I sat at my kitchen table and I thought. Carefully. Methodically. The way Thomas himself had always thought, not from emotion outward but from fact inward, building the picture from what was known before reaching for what wasn't. What was known? Thomas had a second phone that I had never seen. The phone was old enough to predate his current device by several years, which meant he had been maintaining it for at least that long. The phone had been in the pocket of the coat he wore to important occasions. There were 11 voicemails on it. 10 from me, left in grief. 1 from a woman, left 2 days before his death, referencing tickets and a date in March. March 22nd. I knew that date. I had seen it before. It took me a moment to locate the memory, and when I did, the coffee cup in front of me seemed to become very still. March 22nd was the departure date on the one-way plane ticket I had found in the storage unit 5 months ago. Lisbon, Portugal. Booked under the name Daniel Mercer. The woman on the voicemail had known about the tickets. Which meant the woman on the voicemail had known about Daniel Mercer. Which meant she was not a peripheral figure in whatever Thomas had been building. She was inside it. I sat with that for a long time. Then I picked up my own phone, the one I knew entirely, and I did something I had not done in the 5 months since the storage unit. I opened the notes application where I had saved every piece of information from that discovery. The account numbers. The names on the boxes. Catherine. Diane. Ruth. Margaret. The details from the emails between Thomas and Lindsay. The timeline Patricia had reconstructed. The woman on the voicemail was not Catherine. I knew Catherine's voice now. We had spoken enough times in the months since she had read Thomas's letter aloud in Patricia's conference room. Diane. Ruth. Margaret. 3 names on 3 boxes I had not opened. I had not opened them because Patricia had advised me to let the investigators handle them, that opening them myself before the legal process was established could complicate the civil recovery. I had agreed. I had been disciplined about it in the way I had learned to be disciplined about the parts of this that were not mine to manage alone. But now there was a voice. A real voice. 7 seconds of a woman speaking to my husband 2 days before he died as casually as you confirm a dinner reservation. Don't be late this time. Not the first time, then. They had done this before. Whatever this was. Patricia's office had become familiar to me in the way that places become familiar when you spend enough difficult hours in them. The carpet, the particular hum of the building's ventilation, The view from the conference room window of a street that continued its ordinary business regardless of what was being discussed 4 floors above it. Sandra was already there when I arrived. She had the same quiet focus she always brought, the kind of professional stillness that made you feel the situation was being handled even before anything had actually been handled yet. I put the Ziploc bag on the conference table. Sandra looked at it without touching it. "How much battery?" she said. 4% when I found it. I didn't charge it. She nodded. Smart. She had brought her own equipment. A small charging cable, a device I didn't recognize that she connected to the phone before powering it on, a laptop already open. "I'm going to image the device first," she said. "Make a complete copy of everything on it before we do anything else. That way, whatever the battery does, we have the data." "How long?" 15 minutes. Maybe 20. I sat across from Patricia while Sandra worked. "Tell me exactly what you found and exactly where," Patricia said. Her pen was already moving. I told her. The coat. The left pocket. The moment the screen lit up. The voicemail notification. My 10 messages and then the 11th. The woman's voice and the 7 seconds and the date. Patricia wrote without looking up. "March 22nd, she said. "The same date as the Lisbon ticket." She nodded slowly. So she knew the plan. She knew enough of it to confirm tickets. And she said don't be late this time, which suggests previous travel, Patricia said. They had traveled together before. The words settled into the room. My husband had traveled with another woman. Not Catherine. Catherine had been expecting to go to Lisbon, had not yet gone anywhere with him, had been waiting for March 22nd the same way a person waits for a life that is about to begin. This was someone else. Someone who had already been somewhere with Thomas Brooks or Daniel Mercer, or whoever he was in her world. "The 3 boxes," I said. "Diane. Ruth. Margaret. We need to open them. The investigators have already processed Catherine's documentation," Patricia said. "I'll request access to the remaining boxes today." Given the new evidence, she looked at Sandra's equipment. "I think we have sufficient grounds to accelerate." "I want to know whose voice that is," I said. "We'll find out," Patricia said. She said it with the particular calm certainty that had become one of the things I relied on most in the past several months. Not a promise exactly. A statement of intent from someone who had the tools to back it up. Sandra identified the number within 48 hours. She did not do it through any method that required a court order, which Patricia had explained might take longer than we wanted to wait. She did it through the same methodical cross-referencing she had applied to the financial records, working from what we knew outward toward what we didn't, following the thread of Thomas's documented life until it led somewhere new. The number on the voicemail was registered to a woman named Ruth Calloway. 61 years old. Retired schoolteacher. Lived in Providence, Rhode Island. Widowed 4 years ago. One of the 4 names on the boxes in the storage unit. I sat in Patricia's conference room and looked at the name on Sandra's laptop screen and felt something settle into place with the particular quiet of a truth that has been waiting to be found. Ruth. The 3rd box. Thomas had not filed her documentation randomly. He had filed it alphabetically. Catherine, Diane, Ruth, Margaret. Ruth Calloway was the third relationship, or the third that had generated enough documentation to warrant a banker's box of its own. How long? I said. Sandra pulled up what she had found. Based on the earliest dated correspondence in the box, which the investigators shared with us this morning, approximately 5 years, she said. 5 years. Thomas and I had been married for 38. Ruth Calloway had been in his life for 5 of them, overlapping with Catherine by 2 years, overlapping with our marriage for the entirety of her involvement. A retired schoolteacher in Providence who had lost her husband and then found what she believed was a kind and attentive man who understood grief, because he had experienced it himself. He had told her he was a widower too. Of course he had. Patricia made the call to Ruth Calloway herself. I was in the room, but I did not speak. I had learned by now that the first contact needed to be managed carefully, that these women had been deceived as thoroughly as I had, and that the moment of revelation was a thing that needed to be handled with precision and with kindness, in equal measure. Ruth answered on the second ring. Her voice was the voice from the voicemail. I recognized it immediately. Calm, slightly warm, the voice of a woman who had spent decades managing classrooms full of children, and had developed an unshakable steadiness as a result. Patricia explained who she was. Explained that she was calling regarding a man named Thomas Brooks, also known to some people as Daniel Mercer. Explained that she was handling matters related to his estate. There was a silence. Then Ruth Calloway said, very carefully, he told me his name was David. Not Thomas. Not Daniel. David. A third name. A third identity. A man who had apparently maintained 3 separate names for 3 separate women, possibly more, while coming home to a wife who trusted him so completely she had stopped reading the documents he put in front of her. Patricia caught my eye across the table. She kept her voice even. Mrs. Calloway, she said, I need to tell you some things that are going to be difficult to hear. And then I'd like to ask if you'd be willing to speak with someone who has been through a very similar experience. Ruth was quiet for a moment. Is she his wife? She said. Yes, Patricia said. Another silence. Longer this time. How long were they married? 38 years. The sound that came through the phone then was not crying exactly. It was the sound of a particular kind of understanding arriving. The sound of a story reorganizing itself around a fact that changes every other fact. I see, Ruth said finally. Quietly. With a steadiness that I recognized, because it was the same steadiness I had been drawing on since February. The steadiness of women who have survived things and learned that surviving requires staying upright even when the ground has moved. I'd like to speak with her, Ruth said. If she's willing. I leaned toward the phone. I'm here, Ruth, I said. My name is Eleanor. We spoke for 2 hours that first afternoon. Ruth Calloway was precise and clear and entirely without self-pity, which I found immediately recognizable and immediately steadying. She was a woman who had processed grief before. Her husband of 30 years had died of cancer, a long illness, a death she had walked alongside step by step, and who had, in the years after, carefully rebuilt a life she was satisfied with. Then David had appeared at a grief support group in Providence 18 months after her husband died. Quiet, attentive, a good listener. A man who said he had lost his wife and was learning how to exist in the world again. A man who remembered things, what she had said the previous week, what her late husband had done for work, the name of the town where she had grown up. A man who called when he said he would call and arrived when he said he would arrive and never once gave her a reason to look any further than what he presented. We traveled twice, she said. Once to Montreal. Once to Charleston. He paid for everything. He said he wanted to. He said taking care of someone was the thing he missed most about being married. I closed my eyes briefly. He was going to take me to Lisbon, she said. In March. He said it was going to be a fresh start. That we had both earned something new. Something new. The same thing he had promised Catherine. The same ticket, the same city, the same fresh start offered to at least 2 women simultaneously, while a third waited at home in Connecticut believing her husband was taking long drives to decompress from retirement. The voicemail, I said. The one you left 2 days before he died. I was confirming the flight, she said. He had asked me to call that number when the airline confirmed our seats. He said his regular phone was having problems, and he was using an old one temporarily. A pause. I thought it was strange at the time. I didn't ask about it. We understand things more clearly in retrospect. That is the particular cruelty of hindsight. It arrives after the moment when it would have been useful. Ruth, I said. I need to ask you something and I need you to answer it honestly. All right. Did he give you anything? Money, documents, anything he asked you to hold on to? A silence that lasted long enough to tell me the answer before she spoke it. There's an account, she said quietly. He set it up in both our names about a year ago. He said it was for the trip. For Lisbon. He made deposits into it regularly. He said it was his savings, that he wanted me to have access in case anything happened to him before we left. Patricia was already writing. How much is in the account? I said. Ruth told me. I looked at Patricia. Patricia looked at her legal pad. The number was not small. The investigators found Diane 3 weeks later. Diane Prescott. 58 years old. A landscape architect in western Massachusetts. She had known Thomas, as Michael, a third name I added to the list, for 6 years, which made her the longest relationship after our own marriage. She had not known about Lisbon. She had not known about Ruth or Catherine or me. She had known a man named Michael who visited on alternate weekends and who had told her that his work required him to travel and that he was saving toward a future he hoped to share with her. She had a document box too. He had left one with each of them. 4 women. 4 boxes. 4 names. One man who had apparently decided at some point in our marriage that one life was not sufficient, and who had the organizational capacity and the professional discretion and the fundamental coldness of heart to maintain the architecture of multiple lives, simultaneously for years without any of us knowing the others existed. I thought about what kind of man could do that. Then I thought about the man who remembered that I couldn't sleep without the bedroom window cracked. The man who danced with my mother twice at our wedding because he noticed my father's knees were bad. The man who asked me every evening what I needed. Both of those men were the same man. That is the thing I have had to learn to hold. Not that Thomas was a monster disguised as a good man. but that he was a man who was genuinely capable of both, of real tenderness and real cruelty existing in the same person, in the same marriage, in the same 38 years. It does not make the tenderness false. It makes it more complicated than false. Margaret was found last. Margaret Osei, 64 years old. A retired librarian in New Haven, Connecticut. 40 minutes from our house on Birchwood Lane. I had to sit with that for a long time. The man who took long drives alone to decompress from retirement had been 40 minutes away. Margaret had known him as Thomas. His real name. Given to the woman closest in geography, perhaps because maintaining a false name at that proximity presented complications he hadn't wanted to manage. She had known him for 18 months. The most recent relationship. The one that had begun after he retired and started taking long drives. She was a quiet woman when Patricia and I met her in person, which we did because by the time we reached Margaret I had stopped being willing to have these conversations over the phone. She was tall and elegant, and looked at me across Patricia's conference table with the direct, steady gaze of a woman who has spent a career surrounded by books and has developed a particular respect for the truth even when it is difficult. He told me he was separated, she said. That the marriage had been over for years in every way that mattered. That he was staying until the financial situation was resolved. I looked at my hands on the table. The financial situation. The estate restructuring. The papers I had signed without reading. He had been constructing his exit while telling the woman 40 minutes away that the exit was already essentially complete. "I'm sorry," Margaret said. She said it directly, without deflection, looking at me steadily. "I would not have," she stopped. "I'm sorry." "I know," I said. And I did. "So am I." We sat together in Patricia's conference room for a moment, two women in their 60s who had loved the same man in entirely different versions of what they believed that love to be. Then Patricia clicked her pen, and we got back to work. The federal investigators had been building their case quietly for 3 months. Patricia kept me informed in the measured way she managed all information, enough to understand what was happening. Not so much that the details became a weight I couldn't carry alongside the ordinary requirements of a life. I knew the accounts were being traced. I knew Gerald Whitmore's cooperation had opened doors that would otherwise have taken significantly longer to push through. I knew the timeline was being reconstructed from the documentation Thomas had left behind with the compulsive thoroughness of a man who recorded everything and trusted, perhaps, that he would be gone before any of it could be used against him. What I did not know, until Patricia called me on a Wednesday morning in October, was that the investigators had found something none of us had anticipated. "I need you to come in," she said. "Not this afternoon. Not when you have a moment. Come in." I was there within the hour. Sandra was already in the conference room when I arrived. She had the laptop open and a second monitor connected, which I had not seen her use before. Patricia was standing rather than sitting, which was also unusual. Patricia sat during difficult conversations. She stood when she was managing something that required her to be ready to move. "What happened?" I said. Patricia waited until I sat down. "The investigators finished processing the financial records from all 4 document boxes," she said. "Combined with Gerald Whitmore's testimony and the account documentation we recovered from the storage unit, They now have a complete picture of the financial activity. How complete? Complete enough to determine that the total amount moved from your shared assets over a period of 7 years is significantly larger than we initially estimated. She told me the number. I had believed, based on our earlier calculations, that the amount was substantial. The number Patricia said was more than substantial. It was the kind of number that reorganizes your understanding of what was happening in your own home for 7 years, while you made dinner and read books and believed completely in the man sitting across from you. There is something else, Patricia said. Sandra turned the second monitor toward me. The investigators found a fifth account, Sandra said. Separate from the ones connected to the 4 women. Held under a fifth name. Not Daniel, not David, not Michael, not Thomas. A different name entirely. I looked at the screen. The account had been opened 9 years ago. 2 years before the earliest of the other accounts. It was held in a jurisdiction that made it significantly more difficult to trace, which was why it had taken longer to find. The deposits into it were larger and less frequent than the others, not the small calibrated transfers of a man hiding money gradually, but significant movements made at intervals that suggested a different purpose. What was it for? I said. Sandra looked at Patricia. Patricia sat down. Eleanor, she said. The investigators believe Thomas had been planning this for longer than any of us understood. The 5-year timeline, the 7-year timeline, those were the visible layers. This account suggests the planning began nearly a decade ago. Possibly longer. Nearly a decade ago, I had been 53 years old. Lucas had just had his first child. We had celebrated our 29th wedding anniversary at a restaurant in Hartford that Thomas had chosen, because it was where we had gone on our second date. He had ordered the same thing he'd ordered then. He had held my hand across the table and said he couldn't believe it had been 29 years. 9 years ago. While he was holding my hand across a restaurant table on our 29th anniversary, the account already existed. I looked at the monitor for a long moment. Then I said, "What name?" Sandra told me. The name was James Eleanor Brooks. My name. My first name buried inside a false identity like a signature. Like something he had left deliberately, the way he had left the phone in the coat pocket. The way he had left a letter in Catherine's document box addressed to me. James Eleanor Brooks. A name that could not have been constructed accidentally. He knew I would find it eventually, I said. Patricia nodded slowly. That is what the investigators believe, she said. The account, based on its structure, and the way the funds within it were designated, appears to function as a form of provision. The money in it was not being spent. It was accumulating. The designated beneficiary, registered 9 years ago and never changed, is you. The room was very quiet. He left me money, I said. A significant amount, Patricia said. Separate from the assets he was removing. Set aside. Protected in a way that would survive his departure or his death. I thought about the letter in Catherine's box. I know what I was. I know what I cost you. What I can give you is this. He had been leaving me things for years. Pieces of a provision built alongside the deception. As if some part of him had always been maintaining both simultaneously. The man who was planning to disappear and the man who could not entirely abandon the woman he was leaving behind. I did not know what to do with that. I still don't, entirely. It sits in a part of my understanding that has not finished resolving and may not for a long time. The full picture, when the investigators presented it formally 6 weeks later, was this. Thomas Allen Brooks had begun planning a second life approximately 9 years ago. The trigger, as best as anyone could reconstruct from the documentation, appeared to be a medical diagnosis, not cardiac, not the condition that eventually killed him, but something else. Something he had received privately and never disclosed to me or to Lucas. Something that had apparently convinced him that the architecture of his existing life needed to be restructured before it was too late to restructure it. The diagnosis was in the document box he had left with Margaret O'Say, the woman in New Haven, the woman he had given his real name to. Stage 2 cardiac disease. Diagnosed 9 years ago. Managed privately, with a cardiologist none of us had ever heard of, paid for through the account with the 5th name. He had known for 9 years that his heart was failing. He had told no one. Instead, he had begun building exits. Not for himself alone. The account in my name suggested he had been building one for me too, in his own distorted way, understanding that whatever he was planning to do would eventually need to be survived by the woman he was leaving. He had not been able to stop himself from ensuring I would have the means to survive it. I do not know what to call that. I have tried several words and none of them are sufficient. Lucas came to the house the evening after the investigators' formal presentation. He sat at the kitchen table with the same expression he'd had in Patricia's conference room the day we told him about Lindsay. The look of a man recalibrating, resetting, rebuilding his understanding of a father he had believed he knew. 9 years, he said. Yes. He knew for 9 years. Yes. Lucas was quiet for a long time. Outside the kitchen window the October dark had come early the way it does in Connecticut, pressing in against the glass. Why didn't he just tell us, he said finally. About the diagnosis. Just tell us. We could have handled it. We would have. He stopped. I looked at my son. At the face that had his father's eyes and his father's steadiness, and I saw now with a clarity I hadn't had before, his father's tendency to carry things alone rather than share them. I don't know, I said. I've thought about it for months and I don't know. Do you think he loved us? Lucas said. Actually loved us? It was the question underneath all the other questions. The one that had been waiting in the room since February and that I had been circling without being able to approach directly until my son asked it plainly across a kitchen table in October. I looked at my hands. Yes, I said. I think he did. I think he loved us in the way he was capable of loving, which was not the same as the way we needed to be loved. And I think he knew that, which is why he spent 9 years building a provision alongside a deception, because he could not stop doing either one. Lucas looked at the table. That's not enough, he said. No, I said. It isn't. We sat together in the kitchen for a long time after that. Not talking. Just sitting the way people sit when they have said the true thing and there is nothing left to add to it. The clock on the wall kept time the way it always does. Indifferent and steady and entirely unbothered by the weight of what the room contained. Outside, October continued. Inside, something that had been suspended since February finally, quietly, came to rest. The federal case was filed in November. Patricia had prepared me for the timeline. These things move at the pace of institutions, which is to say deliberately, without urgency, with a thoroughness that is both reassuring and maddening depending on which day you ask. But the documentation Thomas had left behind, combined with Gerald Whitmore's cooperation and the account record Sandra had reconstructed from the flash drive and the 5 document boxes, had given the investigators a foundation that was unusually complete. Thomas himself could not be prosecuted. The law does not reach the dead, which is a particular kind of injustice that I have made my peace with only partially and probably always will. What the law could reach were the living participants, the people who had known, who had helped, who had made choices while Thomas was still alive that continued to produce consequences now that he was not. Gerald Whitmore had already accepted his plea agreement. 18 months, minimum security, full restitution. He was 61 years old and had spent 11 years helping Thomas move money in ways that benefited them both and harmed me specifically and the 4 other women incidentally. His cooperation had been complete and immediate, which reduced his exposure without eliminating it. Some choices cannot be walked back entirely, regardless of how quickly you begin walking. Lindsay's situation was more complicated. She had known for 19 months. She had sat at my dinner table. She had held my hand. She had stood in the front row at the funeral of a man she knew was not in the casket, and had not said a word to me or to her husband or to anyone except the federal investigators who arrived at her door in September with questions she had apparently been expecting for some time. Her attorney negotiated. Patricia expected this and had prepared for it. Lindsay's exposure was real but limited, she had known. She had agreed to participate in the post-death financial claim Thomas had designed. But she had not been involved in the original structure of the fraud, and she had not benefited yet, because the claim had not been filed. The investigators were more interested in what she knew about Thomas's methods than in prosecuting a daughter-in-law who had made a catastrophic error in judgment while being manipulated by a man who had spent decades mastering the art of making people believe what he needed them to believe. She cooperated fully. In exchange for her testimony and her complete documentation of every communication she had with Thomas, the federal prosecutors agreed to a deferred prosecution arrangement contingent on her continued cooperation and a period of supervised probation. She would not go to prison. I had been asked, through Patricia, whether I had any objection to this arrangement. I thought about it for 3 days. Then I told Patricia that my objection, or lack of it, was not the point. Lucas was the one who had to live with whatever happened to the mother of his children. Lindsay's legal fate was a matter for the law and for my son, not for me. I would not advocate for severity, and I would not advocate for leniency. I would simply step back from that particular decision and allow it to be made by the people whose lives it most directly shaped. Patricia noted this in her files and did not raise it again. The civil recovery process was the longest and in some ways the most demanding part of what followed, because it required sustained attention over many months rather than a single dramatic confrontation, and because money, even money that belongs to you, even money recovered through legitimate legal process, does not return cleanly. It returns in portions, through wire transfers and court orders and paperwork that requires signatures and patience and the willingness to stay engaged with a process that would exhaust most people. I did not find it exhausting. I found it clarifying. Every document I reviewed, every account statement I signed off on, every transfer I confirmed with Patricia's office was a small act of reclamation. Not just of money, though the money mattered, of course it mattered. A woman of 62 cannot afford to be careless about the financial foundation of the rest of her life, but of agency. Of the particular satisfaction of understanding completely what is yours and insisting, methodically and without apology, on having it back. The account in the fifth name, James Eleanor Brooks, was transferred to me directly once its legitimacy was established. Patricia had anticipated a longer process, but the designation was clear and the documentation was unambiguous. Thomas had been thorough about that too, as he had been thorough about everything. Whatever else he was, he had not left that account in a condition that could be challenged. I did not know how to feel about receiving money from a man who had deceived me for 9 years. I still don't, entirely. I have settled on pragmatic gratitude, which is not the same as forgiveness and does not require it. The money exists. It is mine. I intend to use it in the service of a life that is genuinely mine, which is the most direct response I can offer to what he did with it. The accounts connected to the 4 women were handled separately. Catherine, Ruth, Diane, and Margaret each had their own attorneys by this point, and their own civil claims, and their own processes of recovery that intersected with mine in places and diverged in others. Patricia coordinated where coordination was useful, and stepped back where it wasn't. We had become, the 5 of us, a particular kind of community. Not close exactly. Not friends in the ordinary sense, but connected by a shared experience so specific that no one outside it could fully understand it, which creates its own form of intimacy whether you seek it or not. We established a group message thread in October. It was Ruth's idea, Ruth who had been a schoolteacher for 30 years and understood instinctively that people navigate difficult things better when they are not navigating them entirely alone. We used it practically at first, sharing information relevant to the legal process, flagging things our respective attorneys had said that seemed useful for others to know. Then it became something else. Not therapy exactly. Not a support group in any formal sense. Just 5 women checking in with each other across the months, noting small things, marking progress, occasionally saying the true thing about how a particular day had felt and receiving, in return, the simple acknowledgement of being understood. Ruth texted one morning in December. Had to explain to my nephew why I seemed different. Couldn't find the right words. Settled on. I learned something important about who I am when nobody is watching. Catherine texted from Portugal, where she had taken the travel nursing position. The light here is extraordinary. Also, I tried the pastéis de nata, and I understand why someone might have wanted to disappear here. I'm choosing to show up instead. Diane sent a photo of a landscape project she had completed, a garden designed around a central water feature, clean lines, deliberate structure. No caption. None needed. Margaret sent a quote she had found in a book at the library where she had spent 30 years. The truth will set you free, but first it will make you furious. Then she added, I am somewhere between the furious and the free. Progress. I read these messages on a variety of mornings in a variety of moods and found in each of them something that helped me continue. Lucas began therapy in November. He told me about it simply, over the phone, the way he had begun telling me things directly, without preamble, in the manner of someone who has decided that straightforwardness is the only remaining option after a year of discovering what indirectness costs. I started seeing someone, he said. A therapist. I think I needed to. I think so too, I said. I'm glad. She's good. She asks hard questions. The good ones do. A pause. She asked me what I learned about myself from all of this, he said. I told her I learned that I trusted the wrong people and ignored the right ones. What did she say? She said that was a start, but it wasn't the whole answer. She's right, I said. She usually is. Another pause. Mom. I want to say something and I need you to let me finish before you tell me it wasn't my fault. All right. I spent 19 months living with a woman who knew what was being done to you. She came to your house. She ate your food. She let you hold her children. And I didn't see it. Not a sign. Not a flicker. I looked at her every day, and I didn't see it. He stopped. I know, I said quietly. That is going to take me a long time to forgive myself for. Lucas. I know you're going to say it wasn't my fault. I know that. I believe it most of the time. But some mornings it doesn't feel true, and I needed you to know that. That some mornings it doesn't feel true. I held the phone and thought about what it cost him to say that. My son, who had his father's eyes and his father's steadiness, and who was working very hard not to have his father's silence. Some mornings the true thing doesn't feel true, I said. That doesn't mean it isn't. You keep saying it on the mornings it doesn't feel true until the mornings it does outnumber the ones that don't. A long pause. Is that what you do? He said. Every day, I said. The house on Birchwood Lane sold in January. The closing was on a Thursday morning, unremarkable weather. The kind of flat January gray that doesn't commit to anything. I signed the documents at a table in a real estate office with a window that looked out onto a parking lot and felt, when the last signature was complete, not the grief I had expected, but something closer to completion. 33 years in that house. The kitchen Thomas had always meant to renovate. The bedroom window that had to be cracked open an inch even in January. The hall closet where a charcoal coat had hung for 8 months with a phone in its pocket. The new owners were a young couple with a child and another coming. They had stood in the kitchen during the walkthrough and talked about what they wanted to do with the space. New countertops. Different lighting. A window where there was currently a wall. I had listened and thought that houses absorb everything that happens in them and offer none of it as explanation to the people who come next. The young couple would make their life in those rooms. And never know what had been discovered there. What had been understood. What had finally, quietly, come to rest. I found that comforting rather than troubling. The past does not require an audience to be real. It only requires you to have lived through it. Gerald Whitmore began his sentence in February. 11 months after Thomas died. 1 year after a Valentine's Day morning that I have replayed enough times to have memorized its texture. The quality of the light. The specific warmth of a cheek kiss from a man who was already, in his mind, somewhere else. I did not attend any of the proceedings. Patricia had offered to arrange access if I wanted it. I did not want it. There was nothing in a courtroom that I needed to see that I had not already seen in Patricia's conference room, in a storage unit on a commercial strip 22 minutes from my house, in the face of a woman named Margaret who had known my husband as Thomas, and who had looked at me across a table with the direct, steady gaze of someone who has decided that the truth deserves to be faced directly. I had faced it directly. Repeatedly. Over the course of a year that had reorganized everything I thought I knew about my life and my marriage and the man I had loved for 38 years. I did not need a courtroom to confirm what I already understood. What I needed, and what I had found in pieces over the course of that year, was something simpler and harder than confirmation. I needed to know that I could survive it. I could. I had. In March, the 22nd of March, the date on the plane ticket that nobody ever used, I drove to the airport. Not to catch a flight. I had nowhere specific to be. I drove there because the date had been sitting in my calendar since the storage unit, and I had decided some months ago that I was not going to let it pass without marking it in some way. Not with grief. Not with anger. With something more deliberate than either. I parked in the short-term lot and walked into the departures terminal and sat in a coffee shop near the check-in counters and ordered a coffee and drank it slowly while the ordinary machinery of travel moved around me. Families with luggage. Business travelers with the particular focused economy of people who do this regularly. Couples. Solo passengers. People beginning things and returning to things and leaving things behind. I sat there for an hour. Thomas had planned to be somewhere over the Atlantic on this date. Daniel Mercer with a packed suitcase and a one-way ticket, and 4 women, who each believed they were part of his future. Instead, his ashes had been scattered at sea 6 months ago, at a service attended by Lucas and me and no one else, on a gray morning that matched the mood entirely. I finished my coffee. I thought about Lisbon, which I had never visited and which Catherine said had extraordinary light. I took out my phone and opened a travel website. I looked at flights. Not today. Not yet. But the looking felt like something. Like a door I was standing in front of rather than walking away from. I closed the app and gathered my coat and walked back through the terminal toward the parking lot. Outside, the March air was cold and carried the particular freshness of a season that is not yet what it is becoming. Somewhere between winter and whatever comes next. I pulled my coat closer. I kept walking. It is April now. 14 months since I found Thomas's phone in the pocket of his coat. 14 months since a woman's voice said 7 words that reorganized everything I thought I understood about my own life. The tickets are confirmed. Don't be late this time. I have thought about those 7 words more than I have thought about almost anything else in the past year. Not with anger anymore, or not primarily with anger. With something more like curiosity. The particular curiosity of a woman who has spent 14 months learning that the life she believed she was living was considerably more complicated than it appeared, and who has arrived, on the other side of that learning, at a place she did not expect. The place is quieter than I anticipated. It is also, in ways I am still discovering, more entirely mine. I live now in a smaller house in a different part of Connecticut. Not so different that I lost the landscape I have known for decades, the particular quality of light through bare trees in March, the way the cold comes off the water in October, the specific character of a New England spring that arrives reluctantly and then all at once. But different enough that I am not navigating around the memory of someone else in every room. The new house has a garden, I am learning. Thomas was never interested in gardens. He found them imprecise, which in retrospect explains a great deal. I find them honest. Things grow or they don't. They require attention without requiring explanation. They reward patience in a way that is visible and unambiguous. I have become, at 62, a person who gardens. I did not see that coming. I find that I enjoy not seeing things coming now in a way I didn't before. Surprise has lost its menace. When you have survived the largest surprise available, the smaller ones become something closer to interesting. Lucas comes on Sundays with the grandchildren. They are the best part of every week and they do not know it, which is as it should be. They are 5 and 7, and entirely consumed by the immediate world, by the garden, by the question of whether the bird at the feeder is the same bird as last week, by the elaborate justice systems of childhood that operate according to rules adults have long forgotten. I watch them and think that whatever was broken in this family, whatever was lost, whatever was discovered, none of it touched them yet. They are still in the part of life where Grandma's garden is simply Grandma's garden. I intend to keep it that way for as long as possible. Lucas is quieter than he used to be and more direct, which is a combination I have come to trust. The therapy is working in the way that good therapy works, not by resolving things neatly, but by teaching him to sit with what cannot be resolved and continue moving anyway. He mentions his father occasionally, carefully, in the way you handle something that is still warm. He does not mention Lindsay. I follow his lead. He asked me once, on a Sunday afternoon in February, whether I thought I would ever fully understand why Thomas did what he did. I told him I had stopped asking that question. He looked at me for a moment. "When did you stop?" he said. "When I realized the answer wouldn't change anything that needed to be changed," I said. Understanding why someone does a thing doesn't undo the thing. It only adds an explanation to it. I have enough explanations. What I needed was a life. He nodded slowly. "Is that what you have now?" he said. "A life." I looked at the garden through the kitchen window. At the bird feeder his children had helped me hang. At the light coming through the glass, in the particular way of a February afternoon that is already, almost imperceptibly, beginning to lengthen toward spring. "Yes," I said. "I think that's what this is." Ruth texted last week from Providence. She has started volunteering at the grief support group, where she met Thomas, where she met David, the name he gave her, the name that never belonged to him. She said she does it because she knows what it looks like when someone is being watched carefully by a person who wants something from them, and she has decided that knowledge is useful. That it should be used in the service of people who don't yet know what she knows. I thought that was one of the bravest things I had heard in a long time. Catherine sent a photograph from Lisbon. A terrace overlooking water. Blue light, early morning, a coffee cup in the foreground. No caption except 3 words. Showing up honestly. I saved the photograph. I look at it sometimes in the mornings when the day is just beginning and the garden is still in shadow, and everything feels provisional in the way that early mornings do, before the world has committed to what kind of day it intends to be. There is something I want to say to anyone watching this who has ever found something they weren't supposed to find. A voicemail. a message, a receipt, a key to a lock you didn't know existed, a name that doesn't belong to the face you know. The finding is not the end of you. It feels like the end. In that moment when the information arrives and the world reorganizes itself around it, it feels entirely like an ending. Like everything that came before has been retroactively unmade. It hasn't. The 38 years I spent with Thomas Brooks were real. The man who cracked the bedroom window in January because he knew I couldn't sleep otherwise was real. The man who danced with my mother twice at our wedding was real. The love was real even when the man was not entirely what I believed him to be. Real things do not become false because they were complicated. They become complicated. That is different. Complicated can be survived. Complicated can even, eventually, with enough time and enough honesty and enough people willing to sit across a table and tell you the true thing even when it is difficult, be understood. False cannot be survived the same way. False requires you to rebuild from different materials. I have been doing that for 14 months and I am not finished, but I can see the shape of what I am building and it is solid in a way that the previous version, for all its warmth and familiarity, was not. I am 62 years old. I have a garden I am learning. A son who is becoming honest. 5 women I understand in a way I understand almost no one else. A house that is entirely mine. A passport I renewed last month for the first time in 11 years. I have not booked the flight to Lisbon yet. But I have looked at it twice. That feels like enough for now. If you have stayed with me through this story, thank you. That means more than I know how to say simply. Leave me a comment and tell me where you are watching from. Tell me if you have ever found something that reorganized everything. Tell me what you did with it. I read every single one. And I promise you, whatever you found, whatever it cost you, whatever it reorganized, you are not as alone in it as it feels right now. I know because I have been exactly where you are. And I am still here.